Hi, guys. I see y'all already having conversations in here. And you know what? I think today, even though we do have a topic, I think we're going to open up for some questions. In fact, I will open up for some questions. We've done the last 3 episodes on the Nephilim, and and y'all have been very good. You put up with me being very deliberate about who and how we talk about it. So let's open up for questions on Nephilim. I think we've got enough sort of squared away that we can build off of and start answering broader questions. But there does seem to be two different sets of questions. I think we should be. I have not lost wisdom. I've just lost the weight of the fur. See, that's the thing. It actually weighs me down. So now I'm good. So what we can do. So I'll answer those first two because the first one is the whole right versus left thing, then Melchizedek. So let me answer the question about left versus right because it's actually very, very simple. The entire reason that the Bible, God is talking often about how the right hand is the good hand, the left hand is the bad, all that it is a metaphor. Why? It's actually very, very clear. God is a fan of Rush Limbaugh. That's it. And that's why he was preparing us to understand that whole dichotomy, left versus right. That's it. Okay, that's a joke. That was a joke. It is actually going. So here's the deal. This is why going back and learning about cultures and language is important. So let's ask this question real fast. If you lived in a desert, all right, just walk through this, and this will actually be rules, and you'll recognize this instantly because it actually still applies today. If you live in a desert, water is not popular. Like, it's just not in abundance. Cleanliness is very difficult. Indoor toilets wouldn't exist for another 3,000 years. You feeling me here? So what happens? The best way to prevent you from dying of these terrible diseases, you do all the dirty things with your left hand, and you do all your clean things like eating food, right? Touching other people. Your left hand, that's the no-no hand. That's the hand that takes care of the things you don't want going in your mouth. Unless you're one of those weird freaks. So, why is the right side good and the left side bad? It's because of how people in the ancient world would. I'm really trying to be polite here. It's weird because, it's my beard's being a little floppy here. Basically, you cleaned yourself when you use the restroom with your left hand, and then you just kept your right hand safe. That's it. And that's so lamp of light. That's the whole point. You never would have thought of it because we don't live that way. Like, this is why getting to know ancient cultures is so important, and other cultures is so important because we're fish in water. Fish don't know they're wet, right? Because that's how they exist. They don't know that there isn't water everywhere. They don't understand that. We have never known a world that didn't have indoor plumbing, radios. Like, the oldest person watching the show is not older than the radio. Movies. Oceanic travel. I'm not talking about planes. I'm talking about oceanic travel. The vast majority of human history, people weren't necessarily crossing the ocean on a regular basis. Most ships, now I'm not saying people didn't cross the ocean, they did. There's plenty of evidence for it, but they didn't do it on the regular. They had what's called brown water technology, meaning you stay near a shore. Even the Mediterranean Sea, right? Which features very prominently. People used it to navigate from point A to point B. You still kind of hug the shoreline of the Mediterranean. You didn't just go straight across. We live in a world where certain ideas are very common. It wasn't common back then. And for them, sanitation was a difficult thing to do successfully. So that's why it was a cultural norm that the left hand was sanitation, the right hand was clean for eating. That's how it worked. So now you know. Why is this left hand right hand thing a thing? It's for them, the language is honor, meaning food, shaking someone's hand. They had a version of that. So doing clean things, right? Doing honorable things, doing dishonorable things. That's it. That's your answer. And I saw a question about Melchizedek. Okay, so this is actually very important, Titan. Why is it the Bible would say he had no father or mother? This is one of those things. In fact, let me pull up that verse because the actual wording is really important in that, and therein lies the answer, right? Oh, I always forget which verse that is. Hold on. See, this is the thing. I can remember some of the most mundane trivia in the history of the world, and yet I can't remember where anything's located in the Bible. I just can't. I remember stories. I remember things like that, narratives. I don't remember, I don't know. I just don't. I never have. Having neither. That's it. Yeah, Hebrews 7:3. That's what I thought. I knew it was in Hebrews. I just could not remember where in Hebrews. There. 7. And again, am I using the New King James? I am. And it's because it's my favorite one. It's my favorite version. But remember, there's no such thing as translation, only interpretation. Lamp of Light, there were weird superstitions about left-handed people. And those still exist, because left-handed people are weird. Okay, 7:3, I think. Okay, so chapter 7. So it says, so Hebrews 7, for Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham, returning from the slaughter of the kings, and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all. I can't talk tonight. First being translated king of righteousness, and then also king of Salem, meaning king of peace, without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning nor days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, remains a priest continually. Now consider how great this man was, to whom even the patriarch Abraham gave a tenth of the spoils. So this is one of those things where the question becomes, so he didn't. This is where a lot of people point to as saying this is why it's a theophany, because he wasn't born. He didn't have a father or mother. He didn't die. Well, here's the thing. In that broader context, what they are setting up, and again, some people say it's Paul who's setting this up. I don't think Paul wrote it directly. I think he was part of the group that wrote it, because it's a if you look at the way the word structure is used, it's different from Pauline letters, but there's a lot of similarities to Paul in Hebrew. Some of the opinion that Paul is ultimately an author, if not even the author of Hebrews, but he wasn't the only one, right? He was, and this is and again, this is off topic. Not that we're on the topic today, per se, that we are. Paul has definitely got his hand in the book of Hebrews, and I just don't think it was written as directly as, say, the rest of his letters. But that being said, yes, it is a Marvel T-shirt. So what is happening here is, I think Paul, or definitely the author, is using Melchizedek's reference in the Bible, as a way of saying, hey, he's comparing and contrasting Jesus. It's not that Melchizedek himself didn't have a father or mother, right? It's saying that it is saying that we aren't given an account. We aren't given his genealogy. We aren't given any of that. So he becomes a type and shadow of any of the eternal Jesus. So Melchizedek himself was a human being. He did have a mother and father. He did live. He did die. He was born. But the Bible doesn't record those things because it's irrelevant. But what he does become is a type of shadow, right? He's a precursor. He is something that we can point to in the Bible. It's like, okay, to help us understand what Jesus is. Again, the entirety of the Old Testament. The problem is we look back, right? And so we understand a lot of concepts we try to understand Old Testament concepts through the lens of the New Testament. What we need to do is reverse that. We need to understand the New Testament through Old Testament concepts, so we'll know what it is they're actually talking about. A lot of what happens in the Old Testament is to foreshadow Jesus, so we would understand what he is and what he was doing. Even the great example of this, and this does actually kind of tie into what we're talking about when we talk about the Nephilim. We call it the scapegoat, right? On the Day of Atonement, you have two goats. One is chosen to become a sacrifice for sin, right? The other is given to Azazel. Azazel is one of the 200 Watchers. He's one of the Watchers that teaches humanity warfare and how to make knives and swords and shields and all those kinds of things. So he teaches humanity warfare, and he is chained in the desert of Dudael, right? Well, so Cheese Freak Ginger Snap, to answer your question, which is, I'm going to put this up there because it's a great thing. I thought Abraham and Isaac was the foreshadow of Jesus. Literally, the entire Old Testament has something that is showing us the way the universe works and who Jesus is. There's not one, all of it is. Every feast, every sacrifice, every ritual, the buildings, the utensils, everything is a type and shadow, right? Man, my beard just feels weird today, but everything's a type and shadow. All of it is. And each thing tells us something different. And so it's not that. So Titan's got a great question here. So Melchizedek represents salvation in the old dispensation? Not exactly. And this is important because this is a great sort of question, and this is sort of what we were pointing back to when we were talking about Melchizedek. Melchizedek as a king, priest, and prophet is unique in that it is different from the Old Testament Levitical priests. The reason Jesus being this priest after Melchizedek is so important is twofold. One, again, as we focused on king, priest, and prophet, three different roles no one else would hold. Jesus is a part of that idea, but it's about who was Melchizedek for. He wasn't just for the Jews. He was a Gentile. He was over Gentiles. Jesus isn't just king of the Jews, right? He is king of the Jews, but he's not only the king of the Jews. God was always about redeeming humanity. The Jews played a part. The Hebrew played a part in that, and they played a very important part. It was to bring the kingdom to the world. So it's not that Melchizedek was symbolic of salvation in the Old Testament, but rather it is showing that God's ideal, the role he wanted Jesus to fulfill, is to be king, priest, and prophet to the nations, not just to the Hebrew people. Remember, this is when we were talking about the new perspective on Paul. This was one of those big things. Like, why did the Judaizers think that they needed to make people Hebrew, right? Why were they like, man, we got to follow the law? Because under their understanding of salvation, you had to be part of of Israel, right? So they had to take you out of the world and make you Israel. Jesus is saying, nope, we're back to square one, which is the Adamic covenant, and not going backwards, but going back to where it's not just about one group, it's about everybody. It's about getting out there to everyone. So Melchizedek was a real human being. He did exist, but he isn't a theophany. But he's a metaphor, right? And it's okay, I can't spell Melchizedek either. Well, so here's the thing. Melchizedek actually means, and so, in fact, in Hebrews, again, right here, where you notice it says Melchizedek means two things, right? It says first it means king of righteousness, then also king of Salem, meaning king of peace. Well, here's the thing. The name Melchizedek is, Heiser does it, again, honestly, just type in Heiser and just read whatever he says, because it's probably, I'm not going to say right. What he does do is explain a lot of material, and that gives you the background you need. So, long story short is, Melchizedek does mean king of righteousness, but there is the question of, does Sadak, right? Does it just mean righteousness, or is it actually the name of a Canaanite god, right? There is that question. There is that sort of, what's going on here. And the thing is, the text of Genesis specifically says that he was a priest to El Elyon, or God the Most High. We often forget. We often think, right, okay, Tower of Babel happens. Everyone just forgets God exists, and everyone turns to paganism. It's not that clean. There were people who remembered God. They just they weren't chosen, right? Because God was doing something very specific with the Jewish people. So the whole Abraham thing was very, very important. But there were people who still worshipped God Most High. And again, remember the name Jehovah or Yahweh, depending on which opinion you have, that wasn't given until Moses. Like, even Abraham didn't know God's name. He just knew God Most High, El Elyon. So the question of Melchizedek is, does his name just mean name, like king of righteousness, or is it a title? Is it a reference to a god? And the answer is, it's probably all of the above. It was a name, but it was also probably his title. In the same way we would say Mr. President, right? Imagine you're flipping through a book 200 years from now, right? And when we're all living under the glorious reign of the Chinese emperor and all that, I mean, that's what's going to happen. And you're flipping through and you're like, oh, this guy says Mr. President. Well, is that his name or is it his title, right? And the answer to that is, I'm going to come to title. I'll come to that question here. It's like, well, is Mr. President, like, well, is that his name or is it his title? Well, it's actually both. It is his title, but you can also use it as a name, because if you're the person who is the president, that's also your name, right? So it seems like Melchizedek was both his name and his title, and it probably does have a reference to the God that he was actually worshiping as far as his name. But the God means righteousness, which is correctly identified as El Elyon, or God Most High. So it's a multi-layered thing, right? Titan, is Melchizedek Enoch? Nope, because Enoch was gone before the flood. Remember, he's only, again, Mr. Dinackley, you're saying exactly what I said. Zedek is a god whose name means righteousness, or righteous judge is another way of saying it. So they think it's actually, again, it's El Elyon. Zedek was just the proper name that they used in Salem for God. Because, again, different languages. So remember, Enoch was gone. He lived 365 years, and he was taken up. He was gone before the flood, right? Now, and I mentioned this back when we were doing our review of Revelation, I'm of the opinion it's Enoch and Elijah who are showing up at the end, because they didn't die. Now, I'm not going to die on that hill. Some people are like, it's got to be Moses and Elijah. Fine, okay, groovy. But I think it's Elijah, and I think it's Enoch who are showing up, because they didn't die. One represents the prophet. One represents, to the world, which is Enoch. The other one is the Jewish prophet, who is proclaiming the coming, because both proclaim the coming of Jesus, right? So it's, for me, that's why I'm thinking, you know what? When the two prophets show up, it's going to be those two, right? So again, so back to your question, it can't be Melchizedek can't be Enoch, also because we know who Enoch's father was, don't we? We know when he lived. We have his genealogy, which goes back to what we were talking about on the hangout, right? With Nathan. One of the big, sorry, it's really bothering me, this whole beard thing. It's just, maybe that'll help. Okay. With Nathan, when we were talking, that was one of the things we were talking about, was he is of the opinion, and I actually agree with this, that it appears that and now all I'm seeing is Melchizedek. The Hebrew, the modern Hebrew, it'll come to me. The version of the Hebrew Old Testament that we use today has been corrupted, right? And so Titan, calling down fire from heaven is dead giveaway for Elijah. One thing I would say, though, is remember, no prophet ever did anything of his own power. Moses splitting the ocean or the Red Sea is not Moses splitting the Red Sea. It was God using Moses. So that, now I get the point. It's like, well, but each prophet seemed to have a unique thing, and that sort of identified them, but it's always the power of God. Because they're also spitting fire too, remember? It's not just they call them down. They actually spit fire. Like these guys are doing all kinds of crazy stuff when you get into those final 7 years, and particularly that last half of that, the actual tribulation is the final half, like all gloves are off, right? All gloves are off. No, I know what you meant about Revelation, but that's what I'm saying. Elijah, again, I think Elijah is one of the prophets, but I'm thinking Enoch's the other. But what was I saying? Okay, so yeah, the one of the things we were talking about with Nathan was that I cannot remember what they call Masoretic text. Thank you. Finally, I knew it. Masoretic text, right? Is okay, I'm going to come back to that question, because that's, if I start answering that, I'm going to forget what I'm saying. The Masoretic text appears to have been corrupted, specifically in the ages of the post-flood patriarchs. The Septuagint, Josephus, and the Samaritan Pentateuch all give us that sort of extra 650 years that we talked about with Nathan, right? Why? Well, because rabbis even today will tell you, Melchizedek wasn't some guy who we didn't know who he was, like Hebrews says, like the book of Hebrews says. Rather, he's Shem. Therefore, this whole thing about the Bible pointing out, saying that they know, that he doesn't have a genealogy, whatever, that's all bunk. So you can just throw all that away. The New Testament's crap. Jesus isn't God. It's all make believe, and you can reject all that because we can show Shem was still alive during the days of Abraham. Therefore, Melchizedek is Shem. Yeah, nope, not doing it. If you actually use the ages that are shown again, Septuagint, Josephus, and the Samaritan Pentateuch, Shem's been dead for a good long time. So is Melchizedek Shem? No, Shem was dead. Was it Enoch? Nope, Enoch had ascended. It was people who we don't know. Melchizedek is someone we don't have the genealogy on. We don't know when he was born. We don't know who his father is. We don't know who his mother is. We don't know when he died. We just know this one little thing. And because that little information we know is in itself a sort of type and shadow. It's not that he himself didn't have a father or mother or anything like that. It's the text doesn't record it. And that's a literary type and shadow. Remember, we need to read we need to remember that the Bible is written in a literary sense, so it's written very differently from how a lot of people try to read it. We try to read like we would read a newspaper, and that's not how you should read it. So, well, but Mr. Deacle, so his question is, wouldn't Melchizedek, if human, had to have been a descendant of Ham? He doesn't have to be a descendant. We don't know who he's a descendant of. That's the point. We don't know who Melchizedek's father was. He could have been any of the three, but that's the point. We don't have his genealogy. We don't know who his father or mother was. We don't know when he died. But again, that's because to the text, it's not really important. But Paul, through the book of Hebrews, is pointing back to that fact and saying it's a shadow of the eternal Christ. So, Lamp of Light had a great question. It said, doesn't the Bible say Jesus was the only one who ascended into heaven? What's the difference between Jesus and Elijah and Enoch? Actually, it does not say that Jesus was the only one who ascended into heaven. It said he's the only one who ascended into heaven and to sit at the right hand of God, to sit next to him on the throne. Not that he's the only one to have gone to heaven, but rather that he was the only one who ascended and took authority. Now, to your follow-up, that is also true. Enoch and Elijah were taken up. Jesus ascended. That is another big difference here. So it's not about getting into heaven physically. It's about that Jesus was the first of the resurrection. Everyone who was brought back to life by Jesus and the apostles and all throughout the Bible, they all still died. Jesus was the firstborn of the resurrection. Elijah, Enoch never died, so they're not resurrected. They were simply glorified. They were brought up to heaven. But again, they were brought up. They didn't ascend, and that's a big difference. But the main thing is that Jesus is the only one to be the firstborn of the resurrection, brought up, right? He ascended and took authority and throne. Salem is in Canaan, the cursed descendant, that he would be there. So again, this goes back to not everyone in that area was necessarily of those people. So again, it goes back to, and not necessarily, because we're going to talk about, I would really like to talk about the sin of Ham when we get to that in the text, right? We're talking about Melchizedek because we already started talking about it. But the thing is, the sin of Ham and how that applies to Canaan and why it applies to Canaan and what we were supposed to know about it that's a whole other topic. And there's a lot there to unpack. And I'd really like to unpack the sin of Ham for Canaan to make sense, right? So we'll talk about that more. So, I mean, I don't want to necessarily, move it over. And there is a huge lesson there, right? The fact that that if we work from the assumption that Melchizedek was a descendant of Ham and therefore also a descendant, but more specifically a descendant of Canaan, there is a huge lesson there, and I think that's a reason. I think it's a reasonable expectation, by the way. But there's so much we need to get for that to make sense. We kind of need to address that whole situation first. So yeah. Cheese Freak said Enoch and Elijah still need to fulfill the requirement of death. So that's sort of a yes and no kind of thing. Because remember, not everyone's going to die, right? Not everyone sleeps. Now, you could make the argument. I wouldn't make the argument per se, but you could make the argument that it's not every Christian will sleep. That the Old Testament prophets, they all had to die as part of the curse that Jesus abolished, right? You could make the argument. I don't know that I would. But the fact that they didn't die is also a big thing that a lot of people have pointed to, saying, well, hold on, they didn't die. They weren't properly resurrected. Were they simply raptured? Well, that also doesn't work because Jesus is the firstborn of the resurrection. So I would say I'm I don't think that we can sit there and say because they didn't die, that's why it's got to be them. Because there isn't another option on the prophets. And we did talk about this a little bit. I don't necessarily agree with it, but you could argue that the prophets are actually not Moses or Elijah, but rather people alive today. That there are two prophets who they get up there and they're like, we're going to talk for 3.5 years until y'all shoot us, and we're going to spit fire. We're going to call down. We're going to stop the rain. We're going to stop all these things. We're going to do all these super miracles, and that Elijah and Moses and everyone's just watching, right? And that these are just modern day people, right? So there's not a lot of direct evidence to say that it is Enoch and Elijah textually, but that's where I fall on it for those reasons. Again, we find out they're two modern guys, say Bob and Phil. Okay, I ain't gonna complain. If it's Moses and Elijah, okay, I was half right. If it's Enoch and Elijah, okay, I was right. Congratulations. That and $1.50 will buy you a coffee. So just saying, right? So again, I'm of the opinion it's Enoch and Elijah, but that's me. That's again, lots of little reasons, but no smoking gun. Anything I missed? Yes. So again, Melchizedek being mentioned in both the Old and New Testament. Again, it's interesting because he becomes a type and shadow of Jesus. He becomes an image, right? He becomes something that we can point to. That's all. But yeah, so the fact that he's mentioned, I think, is again Paul trying to point back, saying, guys, this isn't about the Jews, it's about all of humanity. That's what this was always about, right? I think that's everything. Wait. Okay. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, okay. That's it. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. So, we're 30 minutes into this and haven't even begun. We haven't prayed or talked about anything like that. Real quick, Alan says thank you. I mentioned last week or on the last thing that he was going to be on Monday going speaking to the kids because his church is now meeting in a school that y'all that we're helping support. So they're actually being able to meet there. And that has opened up the opportunity for him to go and talk to the children and to meet their families and help minister to them as well. So that went very well from what he's told me. So, that's the thing, right? He's out there. He's doing what he should be doing. He's and we've been able to in our support, right, has been able to put him in a building that has him sort of in a very centralized place where he's talking to people that and he's being and people are able to see the church and get with the kids and get with their parents and really sort of bring people into it. So it's a gift that's multiplying, and he would like to say thank you for everything y'all have done, and I thank you. And again, if you can't, it's perfectly fine. It's just saying, this little channel right here is helping make a difference somewhere where difference needs to be made. Just saying. All right, real quick prayer, and then we'll actually talk about the Nephilim. I love the fact that we spend like weeks or like a couple months building up to Nephilim. We're all like, all right, Nephilim. Now we're talking about Melchizedek. I love the way the world works out sometimes. Father, thank you, and we praise you for everything that you've done. Thank you for bringing us to this place where we can come together and learn and talk and explore these concepts and explore you. Father, help these conversations and the things we learn here and the things we discuss not stop here, but Fill us with your spirit, that we can take it to the world that needs it, to those family members who have turned away or but are waiting, for those friends that we know who have turned away from you, to the person we've never met yet, to some random stranger that we pass who just happens to have a question. Father, we thank you that you've chosen us for this time. We're not an accident. We're not here by random happenstance. You chose us for this time. And we thank you that you put us here, that we can be light and salt in a world that is so desperately dark and so desperately rotting, that we need to be here to save what we can. We thank you for all that you've done, and then your continued guidance. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right, so what do we know so far about the Nephilim, right? What have we proven from the text? And now we're going to get into some of the less... I kind of want to talk about all those things, all the other questions about the Nephilim that we have that maybe aren't as concrete, right? We know that they were, again, Nephilim means giant. We've proven this several times. We know that they are the children of angelic beings, not something else. They were that these angelic beings are Watcher class angels, that these Watcher class angels exchange their knowledge of the universe for these wives, and that they were the cannibalistic offspring. We know. Okay, Cheese Freak, that is actually going to be the next. You know what? You get it. You pulled up the first Nephilim question, because that is a bigger, more important question than you realize. It's one I've addressed as well and thought about as well. So these are things we know about the Nephilim, and we know they existed pre and post flood. So the problem is there's some ambiguity about how we get them post flood, right? Well, we're going to talk about that. But Cheese Freak has a great question, because as we all know, Cheese Freak Ginger Snap gets her name because she's a cheese loving ginger, and we all know about redheads. It's all true. So is this, so the redheaded giant thing that comes from, there are a lot of legends of giants with red hair, and of the giant of Kandahar is okay, Titan, we'll make that question next. The giant of Kandahar was said to have had red hair. Is it possible that the Nephilim actually had red hair? Is that where this gene that gives us red hair and freckles, could it possibly be part of a Nephilim genetic line? Answer to that is it's unclear. It is. So this is where things get weird. The things that control our genetics. Why is someone's skin this color versus this color, their hair this color versus this? It is an interesting question, and it takes a lot of time to explain, more than we have right now. So the question becomes, do people who have red hair, does that mean is that evidence of Nephilim, of a Nephilim bloodline? I don't think that's the case. I don't necessarily think it's not the case either, but I don't think it is the case. I don't think that is it possible that redhead gene sort of gets in there? Yeah, maybe. We don't know. We can't say no. But we also can't say that it's not, because they simply have, those of us who are ginger, and the Nephilim are, it's not because one causes the other, but rather that they're examples of the same thing. And what I mean by that is, I'm trying to get a great example of this. Okay, so the reason people are what they are as far as skin color goes is due to two things, right? Melanin and the thickness of your skin. And here's where it gets weird. Because well, okay, I was about to get really political here. Let me say it this way. There's more than one way to be black. When we talk about, when people talk about Africa, everyone sort of works from this opinion as if everyone on the continent of Africa is the same race. And that is a lie. It is cheese freak. I'm coming to that. And it's a lie. What Americans and those who came through the slave trade to America, they were basically those tribes are closer to the West Coast. The Zulu Empire was expanding during that period and so it was sort of these Zulu and Zulu related sub-Saharan African tribes that were being traded, because the Zulu nation was actually using the slave trade to finance their empire that actually started to move into South Africa. There are what you could argue that there are, again, if you want to argue race, it's a complicated matter. But the fact is, there are different adaptations and different populations achieved darker skin tones in different ways all across Africa. One is, yes, melanin, but the other one is having a say higher melanin count, but also a thicker skin. So if you're sub-Saharan African from the West Coast, it's more about a high presence of melanin. But you go to what is now Ethiopia, yeah, melanin count is higher, but the skin's also the keratin in the skin's also thicker, so they come out again darker, but more almost orange. We see this with Aborigines as well in Australia. People call them black because their skin is dark, but it's different from, say, someone from Africa. So it's not so human skin color. The reason we have certain skin tones is because of a number of factors, not just the one. So the thing is, people who have red skin, lighter, ruddier, reddish skin, freckles, red hair, it's not because you have a different, like some radically different genes, right? It's not like, okay, so here's normal skin color, and then here's this weird ginger gene that's shown up like the X-Men, right? And it's like, boom, you've got a superpower. That's not what it is. Everything exists along this spectrum. And basically, depending on where your people sort of came from, post-Babel, everyone sort of adapted to a certain environment. And so certain things were picked, right? It's like, well, your skin would be this thick, but your melanin count would be here. And so because everything's interrelated, certain adaptations lead to lighter eyes and lighter hair colors, which gives you red, blonde, and some of these in sandy colored hair. So why do I say it that way? It is more than likely reasonable to assume to believe that the Nephilim, if it is true, because let's be honest here, I'm willing to think that the giant of Kandahar was real. I'm willing to think that, right? But and there's reason for the auburn and reddish hair to be associated with the giants with the skulls that we found in Peru, right? So I'm all for it. But again, do people of the northern climates have red hair because of the Nephilim, or do the Nephilim simply have red hair because of the same adaptation? I think it's the same thing. For example, there are true bats, right? Which look like they're basically rats with wings. But then you have flying foxes. Those are the big ones, right? They're really big and they look like they have fox faces, right? Those are actually not related at all. We call them, that's why we call them flying foxes versus bats. I mean, they're all bats, right? That's what we'll call them, but they're not related at all, right? It's what you have are two completely different species showing the exact same adaptations. Now, I think it's because God designed that. It's like God just said, okay, will have two different things flying, but they're not related. So are the Nephilim, do the Nephilim have red hair? It's entirely possible that they do. Do people like Cheese Freak and me, do we have red hair because we're related to them? I'm going to go with no. I can't say it definitively, but I'm going to go with no. But here's another thing to think about. When you see someone in Africa who is of traditional African descent, sub-Saharan African descent, they call them albino. They're not really technically albino, but you'll notice they tend towards the red spectrum. Why? Because of the melanin. It's certain things get triggered at certain points. Second reason, I ain't got 6 fingers. I ain't got 2 rows of teeth, right? It's more than just having red hair to be a Nephilim. Now, I will say this. I'm also not inclined to say that maybe Europeans do have, and maybe the Gingers do have a slightly higher percentage of Nephilim blood. Maybe we do. But it certainly is enough to not make us human, because I got 5 fingers. Well, technically 4 fingers and a thumb. You got 4 fingers and a thumb, unless you did something, unless you were careless one day and got a nub knocked off. You ain't got 2 sets of teeth, right? It's being a Nephilim is more than just having red hair. And I'll even go one step further. I am not of the opinion that Nephilim are irredeemable. Or let me rephrase this. 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation Nephilim, and let's face it, if you're a Ginger today, you're at best 1,000. You probably have less Nephilim in you than Elizabeth Warren has Indian. All right. But I am not convinced that 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation Nephilim didn't have free will. In fact, it's kind of obvious that even the 1st generation Nephilim had free will. They just chose not to use it appropriately. So it's because of the evil that they did that they were punished the way they were. So, just saying, it's an important question, because a lot of people are like, well, hold on, if the giants have red hair, and it's like, then what about the rest? Like, does that mean that we're some kind of Nephilim? No, I don't think it does. I think it's way more than that, right? But I won't say that doesn't mean there isn't some kind of Nephilim blood in there, but I just don't think that's the case. I think it's more about we're simply showing a similar genetic mutation for certain things. Again, but why do the Nephilim have their particular mutations? Because their parents, their fathers at least, aren't what they were supposed to be, right? And this is a big question, right? This is one of those things I think is really radically misunderstood about the Nephilim. We assume that, let's say we actually find Goliath himself, right? Let's say we dig him up, right? And it's like, look, here's a big sign. It says, this is Goliath. He's 9.5 feet tall. He's got double rows of teeth, 6 fingers. He's we got all of it. He's clearly Nephilim, and he's clearly Goliath. Let's say we find this thing, right? If you do a DNA study on him, you're not going to be like, well, he's half human and half this thing we've never seen before. That's not what you're going to find. What you're going to find is he's a human with mutations. Why? Rabbits can't have offspring with chickens, can they? Horses can't have offspring with dogs. You have to be the same species to breed. So how do angels, which are spiritual beings, have children with humans? They take on a physical human body. Cheese freak, so have I, and that's why I did it. It's why I have a solid answer for that one. That's why I wanted to walk through all of that. But they had to take on a human body. But here's the thing, because they weren't naturally born, because they weren't supposed to be here, the human bodies they took on were incomplete. Their genetic profile, what didn't have everything in it that was supposed to be there. So what happened? Well, in the same way, like, again, the liger. We talked about the liger a couple weeks ago on Texas show. A liger is a male lion with a female tiger. Well, it's the female lion that has the growth gene, and it's the male tiger that has the growth gene. So when you have a male lion with a female tiger, what happens? The liger grows to enormous size, and they're perfectly healthy. Why? Because there's nothing in them to say you can't be this tall or this large. And they are monstrous. That's what happened with the Nephilim. Their DNA doesn't have that cutoff that says, okay, you get to be 6 feet tall, or you get to be 5 feet tall. And so they became tall. How tall is a huge question, right? Were they 50 feet tall? Were they 20 feet tall? Were they 10 feet tall? It's ambiguous. We have some questions. The book of Enoch, right? It says, something about 300 L's or 3,000 L's. Okay. Well, some people think that when it says that, it means that the L that is referenced is close to a cubit, which would make these things massive. But what if it wasn't? Again, measurements throughout time have not always remained the same, and they haven't always meant the same thing. We see that today, right? And even with, like, say, the U.S. and Britain, like, there are certain numbers that mean different things, to them. Now, we've standardized most of that out, but it's still there a little bit, right? Just teeny tiny little things. But it is entirely possible that the L that is described in the book of Enoch isn't a cubit, like a lot of people assume. I mean, it's not like that. It's actually closer to like a centimeter. It's very, very small. Well, if you do it that way, then they're only coming out to about 18, 20 feet tall. Again, pre-flood, which, by the way, matches up very nicely with Og, king of Bashan. If you assume, again, the problem is everyone assumes that when it says cubit in the Old Testament, it means 18 inches. That is not true. We're not certain what measurement of cubit they were using. There have been many with many different designs, many different sizes, so we don't really know. It is entirely possible, and again, one of the measurements I was able to get for trying to figure out how tall, Goliath was, one of the ranges for Og is about 18 feet tall, and there are accounts of people being that tall. So it is entirely possible that the pre-flood Nephilim were 18, 20 feet tall. It's also very equally likely that they were 10 feet tall, right? They didn't need to be, you don't need to be something out of a sci-fi novel to be considered a giant. You just have to be outside the normal parameters of human height and have the muscle mass to really be a threat. Again, if you ain't got a belt-fed machine gun, some dude who, if you're facing off against some dude who's 9.5, 10 feet tall, 11 feet tall, and he's ripped, right? If he's supposed to be that tall, and you're going to die real fast. I assure you. This is why guns are important, people. You can kill these things much easier than you could, say a couple thousand years ago when you've got a sword this big. So it's again, they were tall and they were large, I think, because they were incomplete genetically. Same reason ligers become large. Well, that also means their coloration is going to be different. So it's just, I think it's more about similar mutations. Yes, Titan, there was a royal cubit of 24 inches, but there's also a royal cubit of like 25 point something. There's a 35-inch cubit. There's an 11.5-inch cubit. There's a 17.5-inch cubit. There's an 18-inch cubit that the Romans used and sort of everyone thinks of. So there were a bunch of different cubits, which is sort of the problem. We just don't know. Compared to the cedars of Lebanon. So Titan, yes. But is that a literal thing, or is that just them saying, hey, they're really tall, like they're being hyperbolic. Remember, we talk about, we talk about seeing tall people today who are, 7 feet tall. And we're like, man, that guy was a monster. He was like the side of a barn. Like, we're just, again, it's sort of that whole, it's hyperbolic language. They're just saying they're really tall. And again, I go back to, imagine, we think of most modern giants, which is they're, like Robert Wadlow, where it's a pituitary gland issue, right? They become very tall and thin, right? They become very tall and thin. But imagine someone who is 9.5 feet tall, but then proportioned out. I assure you, you're going to find the tallest thing in the world to compare it to. Let's also remember, back in the day, right? Most people didn't have tall buildings. We talk about people who are as tall as a skyscraper today, right? We don't mean they're literally as tall as a skyscraper. We're just saying they're very, very tall. Same thing. The cedars of Lebanon were exceptionally tall trees. It's just they were trying to say these guys were absolutely massive. Does that mean they were literally 20, 30 feet tall? Who knows? There's no evidence for someone necessarily being that tall, but there is evidence of there's plenty of evidence for people being over 8.5 feet on the regular. We do have evidence of people over 8.5 feet tall appearing all throughout history and being very strong, very fast. These are clearly not people who had pituitary gland issues. These are people who were clearly that big. And polydactylism is very common with some of these people, with accounts all throughout history. So, again, I think the main thing is we often don't realize how big someone who's 9.5 feet or 10 feet tall would appear to somebody who's 5'3" or 5'5". In particular, it's not just extra tall, but extra wide. I mean, just stop to think about just how. There's something here. Okay, lamp of light. No, the platypus I don't think is I don't think it's a hybrid at all. I think that's what it's supposed to be. And I'm doing a follow up eventually. I gotta, again, some other things need to clear out, but I'm gonna do a follow up to how Bigfoot and UFO prove the Bible is true. Pre-flood, animals, there was a lot of diversity pre-flood as far as types of animals. Everything that we see today is simply a scaled down version of what we had pre-flood. So there's a lot of diversity that's lacking. I think it's just that pre-flood, there was a lot of weird things because God was like, look at how awesome I can make things. Let's make a planet full of diverse life with all these different kinds of things. And we go and screw it up. So it's like, okay, well, if you're in a house, right, and the house is full of amazing art, but you can only take what you can carry, same sort of situation, right? The platypus survived because it's a representative of a particular family of animals, right? It doesn't have to have mixed DNA. It just had to be a representative of that family. But it's representative of I mean, you want to look at, they call them Pleistocene animals. You will see the weirdest, wildest mammals you've ever seen in your life. I mean, really, really weird looking things. That's all it is, right? Og was crazy tall, right? Yeah, 3-to-1 ratio, right? So the right ratio for us is supposed to be 3-to-1, meaning 3 high, 1. Yeah. Again, we don't really know if they were 3-to-2, but even if you keep, but that does make sense. They would be 3-to-2, because again, when you make something larger with an animal, it's cubed, right? So it's not just that you get taller, you get wider, and it actually grows exponentially, which is also one of the reasons why I don't look at large megalithic structures as evidence of giants because of strength, right? People are like, well, that had to have been moved by a giant. I don't think so. I think it's mostly what we see. The reason I look at it as cyclopean construction, it's not about the strength. It's about the ingenuity. It's about knowing how to build it. Because all indications are that the Nephilim were tyrants, and their fathers were tyrants. They ruled over humanity. Well, guess what? If you're the one ruling humanity, you make them build your megalith, right? Think about it. You're this giant cannibalistic tyrant. You're gonna move your own blocks? Heck no. You're gonna be like, I'm gonna have my serfs move these blocks, but I'm gonna show you how to do it, right? So it's for me, it's more about the knowledge of how to build those things rather than saying, well, it's big, therefore you had to be giant to move it. I do think the giants were very agile, they were very strong, but I don't think they were like, we try and portray them often as almost like superhuman, like they're X-Men or something. I don't think they were that powerful. I think they were just big, which means they were strong. But the bigger you are, the heavier the bone has to be, the denser the bone has to be, the heavier the muscle mass has to be. So you're using a lot of that muscle just to move. So it's not necessarily making you, you're not Colossus or the Juggernaut. You're just, or the Hulk. Sorry for those of you who maybe aren't as familiar with Marvel Comics. You're not the Hulk, but you are strong. Platypi, and I will never say platypuses is not a real thing. I don't care if we're accepting it. Octopus is also not a real thing. It's octopi. It's platypi, just like syllabi. All the same thing. They live in Australia. And yes, we're actually going to talk about Australia when we get to the flood. Believe you me, Australia, South America, they're going to come up real big. And yes, I know, I think Titan is the one who keeps talking about Pangea. Pangea is going to come up when we get to the flood. I assure you. So many bizarre creatures, yes. And if you really want to know how bizarre creatures can get on this planet, just go to Walmart. I mean, let's be honest. Okay. All right, I think we're good on that. Oh, by the way, lamp of light. Other thing about our favorite duck beaver, known as the platypi. They're also the only mammal with venom. The male have these spurs that have venom in them. So there you go. Just one more weird thing. If you really want to see something that's also weird, the echidna, which is also, I think it's a marsupial, I forget, but it's weird. Moles are weird. So like I said, there's just a lot of weird critters out there. We probably don't have time for your former question. What was your former question? Because I think yes. Okay, so I say your question about the platypus, that some biologists actually did think it was fake. Yes. They absolutely thought it was fake when they had to, it wasn't until they brought a live or living specimen that they accepted it as real. They absolutely thought it was fake. But I don't see. If you can repost your question, I think I'm missing it. So Titan, if you could repost your other question, I would love to answer it. Yeah, we're kind of out of time, but I'll take it. I'll take it as our last question. Well, Titan, that's the problem. Is there's a lot of questions concerning the Nephilim way up there. Is the one about the cedars of Lebanon? Because is it all things? Is it the all things were corrupted, maybe tampering question? 807. Okay, 807. Let me look. See that now that's helpful. And I'll be honest, I didn't realize they had timestamps on until right now. And they were mentioning the sons of God. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay. So let me put that question up there, and then so I can read it and also keep up with the chat. Okay. For those who are listening, Titan asks, I think it's interesting, or I guess it's a statement question. I think it's interesting that they're mentioned with the sons of God and in a statement of sexual misconduct. Just can't think the two are tethered. Howdy, Bob. Well, so here's the thing. Yes. I mean, so again, it goes back to the sons of God. So the idea of being a son of something, that is denoting where you came from, right? Which is why it's the human women are called the daughters of Adam, right? And literally, Adam meaning earth, daughters of the earth, sons of God. It's separating divine and dirt. So that is absolutely there. Now, why call them sons of God versus, like say, angels? Well, again, it's a different word. I think, in many ways, I think the reason they did that was to create the difference between humanity and the angels. They wanted. It's funny it's a statement that is so clear and precise and obvious that we screw it up. We're like, well, they can't really mean divine beings by saying sons of God. Remember, we have to remember what the author is doing here. I do believe it to be Moses, is that he is saying sons of God, so divinity, and the son and the daughters of man. Like, it's an obvious dichotomy that they're creating. Because remember, angel is a New Testament word. That's a Greek word. And it just means messenger. And the problem is there are words used for angelic beings in the Old Testament that don't necessarily, sort of make sense in a lot of things. It actually gives some ambiguity. It's context that's telling us what they are. So in the context, what's being set up here is sons of God, meaning divine beings, and daughters of Adam, meaning humans. So it's the contrast that really tells us what this is. Now, you're not wrong by saying that, the fact that that's a statement of sexual misconduct. That's exactly that is what he's driving at, that the Nephilim are the offspring of what is clearly misconduct, right? Why? Because as Jesus himself said, the angels which are in heaven. An angel, an angelic being, a divine being is what? Spiritual. It is not material. What are people? What are human beings? We are material beings. Madonna got one thing right. We are material beings. And the conflict, again, we don't see the conflict as dramatically as someone who reads Hebrew would, right? Because we just see, okay, sons of God, daughters of Adam, or daughters of man. But for them, their mindset, this is the fact that he sets it up in that manner is to tell us how obscene this event is. I'm trying to think, but in our culture, here's how we would say in our culture. They're setting up the difference here. It's that discrepancy that shows you how obscene it is. For example, honestly, I'm really having a hard time. Okay, color theory. Play with me on that. Well, hang with me on this one for a second. Have you ever noticed that certain colors like red and green actually get brighter when you put them side by side, right? It's because certain colors, but if you take other colors and you put them side by side, they sort of become visually gray. So even though you have different colors, it all just sort of blends together, right? And it's bland. Okay, so Titan, we'll come. So here's the thing. Okay, so let me finish this, and we'll come back to your second question here because we have kind of answered that one a lot, actually. Well, dang it. Hold on. There we go. So certain colors, it's called visual gray. So even though they're different colors, right? If you put them next to each other, though, it just sort of becomes, blah. You're like, that doesn't look interesting, or it's because they're actually of equal tonal value. And so it kind of just recedes to the back. But then you have contrasting colors like red and green, right? You put them, you can be like, man, that's a bright red, man, that's a bright green. But if you move them together, they become brighter. It's that conflict, right? In the same way, the text is making the divinity and the dirt is the conflict. And that right there, to the Hebrew mind, there we go, to This is the perils of a beard, right? It's making that conflict creates it is setting up saying, hey, there is a problem here. This is discordant. This should not be. That's why I've taken to using the phrase divinity and dirt, because that is what's happening here. It is obscene. Now, as we've stated, so the sons of God, they are the watchers. They marry the women. The Nephilim are the offspring of the sons of God and the sons of and the daughters of men. So yes, the Nephilim are their children. Again, I've been kind of clear on this in the past, but I want to make sure we understand. No, the Nephilim, and this is why. So there are people who will make the argument that the Nephilim are not the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of women. There are people who make that argument. This is why, again, we did the first week was Genesis 1, talking about the text. Then it was the book of Enoch. The book of Enoch absolutely makes it clear. There is no ambiguity. Now, I would argue there is some ambiguity in the text, but you kind of have to, but the obvious reading of the text is the Nephilim are the offspring. But the book of Enoch makes it undeniably clear. It is perfectly clear that the offspring are the children of the watchers that mated with humanity. So again, that's why I built the argument the way we did. The text, I think, from Genesis 6 is clear enough to say, here it is. There are people who say it isn't. Okay, great. But which is why we talked about the book of Enoch, which makes it, I think, perfectly clear. It's like the Nephilim are the children of God, or the Nephilim are the children of the Watchers. We'll just use the term Watchers. Watchers, sons of God, same being, right? Same things. They do the wild monkey loving with the women. You get your Nephilim. That's what Nephilim is. So, at least your first generation Nephilim. I think it's more about the genetics being manipulated or not correct. But yeah, so there are people who will say the Nephilim are not the offspring of angels and humans, and I think they are dead wrong. I think the text is actually clear enough in Genesis 6, but the book of Enoch lays it to rest, right? So the conflict that you're saying is like why the Nephilim, the obscenity of the Nephilim is that they are two things that should not go together, right? Like, well, I'd say pickles and anything because I really hate pickles. But let's say pickles and ice cream, right? You should. No one should put pickles and ice cream together because pickles are awful creatures. They're of the devil. As far as I'm concerned, pickles are of the devil. But you take something like a pickle and you put it with ice cream? No, not doing it. It's disgusting. Or pickles and milk. Like, you don't do it. Like, no one does this. This is clearly deviant behavior. That's what they're trying to say. And again, it just doesn't come across as strong in our text, right? Because our text is, our text, again, English, this is the problem that I think one of the big problems we have with the Bible. Our entire culture, our language is in many ways predicated on the Bible or a specific reading of the Bible, so that the problem is we don't recognize everything has our connotation to it and our thinking on it. We're not going back to the original mindset of the people reading it. So it doesn't stand out to us anymore. Again, great example of this, and I talked about this before, right? Because again, there is no translation, only interpretation. Genesis 1, right? And of course here we are. So at the beginning it says, in the beginning God created the heavens, the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit was hovering over the face of the waters, right? Well, you come down here to when God makes humanity, right? Okay. And the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. What we translate as the breath of life is the exact same word that we see as the Spirit of God in chapter 1. Now, because we have the words chapter 1 and chapter 2, sort of we separate those words, and it's not the same word in our text. To a Hebrew reader, right? Not me, but to a Hebrew reader who's like, hey, I don't have verses, or I mean, they do now, but they don't have chapter and verse necessarily in their, in the original text. They're reading, right? And I believe it's ruach in Hebrew. Don't quote me on that, but I think it is. They would see, okay, and in the ruach of God, or the ruach was hovering over the face of the waters. Okay, and then it's like, and then God breathes the ruach into his nostrils. Oh, okay, hold on, same thing, right? They make that connection. We literally can't. We would never say. I mean, it almost seems like they're two different things here. Like, one is the Spirit, meaning the Holy Spirit. We think of it as a person because it is, or he is. But then we have the breath of life. So we're thinking the breath of life is something distinct and like a thing. Like, okay, you have made horseradish and you've given horseradish to somebody. That's sort of what we see in our language, but that's not what's in the Hebrew. The Hebrew makes it clear it's the same thing, but we miss that. So when we look at the question of the Nephilim, we look at it in English, we're like, well, who are the sons of God? Are they this? Are they that? Right? We have all these arguments because it's, to our mind, our modern English Western mind, it seems like it should be something else. Because, like, why didn't they just use the word angel? Well, because that word didn't mean anything to anybody at that time, right? It's a modern idea. And I would even argue the word angel is actually, in many ways, was radically misunderstood. And we've talked about that in the past. So, anyway, long story short, so that's what we talked about today. Lots of wonderful, weird things. The Nephilim, so, if you got red hair, don't worry about it. You're not a Nephilim. If you were 10 feet tall, had a double rows of teeth, 6 fingers, and you're eating people, I'd worry. But if you're not, you're probably fine. And again, Nephilim, offspring of angels, women, they're bigger not because they have special angel DNA, but because the DNA that they have is incomplete, like a liger, which is why post-flood, and we'll talk about this later, post-flood Nephilim, I think this is why we get a lot of these elongated skulls, and the people who have the elongated skulls have other malformations on them. Is what you have is them trying to retain that genetics, right? They're trying to maintain that Nephilim genetics. Well, the problem is you're inbreeding some really screwed up DNA to begin with, so you're going to get weird stuff, and that's what happens. So, just some thoughts. We're gonna stay with the Nephilim for a little bit. I really was originally going to talk about Azazel today, but I want to do a little more digging. I kind of came across something. I've run across it before, and it's in the back of my head, but I'm not there yet. So I'm gonna push Azazel down the road a little bit. I think next week we're gonna talk about where post-flood Nephilim come from. We've kind of addressed it already, but I'd like to get more into where do the post-flood Nephilim come from, and what do we do with them? What did they do? What is their history? And then we'll probably wrap up with Azazel. Honestly, I think once we sort of work through the rest of it, he'll make a lot more sense. So anyway, yeah. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk more about the post-flood Nephilim, because again, the pre-flood Nephilim are pretty straightforward, right? Enoch talks about them. Post-flood Nephilim, there's not a lot to go on. Like, the Bible really is kind of quiet on them. And let me say one thing in closing, just so we're all on the same page. We mentioned this at the beginning when we were talking about this, the prophecy in Genesis 3 about the seed of the woman being Jesus and the seed of the serpent. who are the serpent seed, or what is the serpent seed? I think the answer to this lies in the Nephilim. Again, we explain why it's not Cain. It is the Nephilim, and I will argue, I think it is even actually the Antichrist spirit. I think the Antichrist spirit is the serpent seed. The Nephilim are sort of that key, and that's why we're going to talk about the post-flood Nephilim next week, because that ties a lot into this, right? That's very much where a lot of this is going. And once we kind of get to that post-flood Nephilim, I think it's going to become very clear how and what the Nephilim represent throughout the rest of the Bible. But just to make it perfectly clear, I do think that the Antichrist spirit is a Nephilim. Where I'm ambiguous, and I'm not 100%, is what side of the flood he's coming from. So, anyway, just a thought. And like I said, by the time we get to Azazel, a lot of this it's going to really put a nice big old bow on this whole topic. And then we'll actually get to the rest of Genesis 6. So, wonderful time. I really did, sometimes you got to just take the questions, right? It's not, you can't always be 100% pre-planned and thought out, and y'all have been patient enough as we worked through these things. So I figured we'd get some questions. So appreciate y'all, love y'all. Let's keep doing Christianity. Let's not just be hearers of Christianity. Bring these things to the people around you. Remember that you were put here for a reason. You are not an accident. You are here for a reason, and now is the most important time for you to be you and to be doing what you're doing, right? No, nothing related, John. Yeah. This is the most important time for you to be you that has ever been. You need to be you are made for this time, right? Now, y'all are all going to be doing different things. Y'all aren't going to be doing what I'm going to be doing, and I can't do what y'all do, right? It's easy to look and say, well, this guy's on YouTube, or this guy's on the television, or this guy's over here, or this person's doing this, this woman's doing this. Forget all of that. What are you doing? What is the one thing only you can do? Who is the one person only you can meet? That's what matters, right? Ask yourself that question. Because remember, Christianity is not about big churches. It's not about money or any of these things. It's about rightness with God. You are a king and a priest in a kingdom that is coming. Our job, get everybody off this boat, because it's going down. Don't get caught up in all the stuff that is going to burn up. Get involved in things that won't, which are the souls of the people you know. So we'll catch y'all on Sunday. I have no idea what we're talking about on Sunday at the moment, but it'll be fun no matter what we do. All right? Y'all be good.